Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nandini Cheka. My nickname is Deanie. I'm the project director here at ANJAC, and welcome to Local Planning for Climate Change webinar. This is our very first webinar of the new year. Even though it's January 27th, it feels weird to say the new year, but it is Happy New Year, folks. Along with me, we have our Deputy Director, Liz Ritter, and she's been incredibly helpful as always. And so she's in the background helping out with this webinar. We have a phenomenal panel today. This will be recorded and shared out on our YouTube channel ANJAC Views. In fact, Nick Angarone, who is our speaker today, has given a webinar with ANJAC in the past. So back in August 2020, I don't know if Nick, you remember, but you did a fantastic webinar with Nick Procopio on the climate change resiliency. And for folks who haven't seen it, I highly encourage watching that. It's an excellent primer. And if you have seen it, watch it again. It's a fantastic program. For today, we are going to be taking questions at the end. Please put your questions into the chat box. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers and turn it over to them. All right, so first up will be Matt Blake. So Matt has begun his third year serving as a senior area planner with the New Jersey Office of Planning Advocacy, where he works closely with the State Planning Commission, other state agency, and various municipalities within the New Jersey Highlands region. Much of his work involves assisting towns that are pursuing the state plan endorsement and updating various state planning rules and guidelines with respect to the state plan and the plan endorsement process. Prior to joining OPA, Matt served as the Director of Community Development for Woolwich Township in Gloucester County, where he oversaw various planning and development activities, including a comprehensive smart growth, land preservation, and park development program. Through Matt's efforts, the township received the prestigious annual Governor's Environmental Excellence Award in 2017 for preserving over 920 acres of valuable farmland and open space within an 8-month period. He has a BS in conservation biology from Prescott College and an MS in resource management administration from Antioch University. He also lives in Lambertville and just been appointed to the planning board there. So congratulations to you, Matt. And Nick Angarone is New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer and manager of the Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning and at the DEP. As the Chief Resilience Officer, Nick coordinates statewide resilience policy as Vice Chair of the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience, leads and directs the development of the statewide climate change resilience strategy, and provides technical guidance and support to local governments in their efforts to plan for and address current and anticipated impact of climate change. And there's a lot of that going on. And as manager of the Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning, he administers New Jersey's coastal management program in cooperation with a network of programs across DEP. Nick also represents the commissioner on the State Planning Commission, ensuring that climate resilience, natural resource protection, and infrastructure capacity is incorporated into the planning process. Nick has been with the DEP since 2004, and he holds a master's of city and regional planning from the Blasting School at Rutgers University and a BS in environmental planning and design from Rutgers University. So welcome to you both. We are incredibly grateful that you joined us today. So I am going to stop share, and Matt, I'm going to leave it to you to share your screen.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Deanie and ANJAC for hosting this webinar. A little bit about the Office of Planning Advocacy. We are under the Department of State. That's housed within the New Jersey Business Action Center. OPA's role in a nutshell, we provide administrative staff support to the State Planning Commission. We work to implement the goals of the State Development and Redevelopment Plan, otherwise known as the State Plan, to achieve comprehensive long-term planning and coordinate statewide planning to protect the environment and guide future growth into a compact mixed-use development format, integrating planning with programmatic priorities and regulatory land use decisions among our other state agency partners at all levels of government. I'm going to quickly walk everyone through OPA's Municipal Climate Resilience Planning Guide. That's a mouthful. which by design is not meant to be comprehensive, but to serve as a primer for municipal officials, volunteer EC and Green Team members who may be less familiar with the recent changes to the municipal land use law with respect to climate resilience, or who may not have time to delve deeper into DEP's recently released Local Planning for Climate Change Toolkit that you'll hear more about from our esteemed DEP panelists next. If anything, the introductory 6-page guide before you is meant to set the table for DEP's toolkit. It does not address climate mitigation, such as greenhouse gas emissions reduction and associated energy efficiency efforts, although our office will likely tackle that in an upcoming publication in the near future. As stated in our intro section, the guide was developed to assist municipalities in complying with the recent amendments to the MLUL signed into law in February 2021 that require a climate change hazard vulnerability assessment, a policy statement, resiliency strategies, and a build-out analysis, among other measures, to understand and address climate-related vulnerability and risk in a comprehensive fashion. It outlines what the amendments to the MLUL specifically require and expands upon those requirements by providing recommended best practices towards the development of a climate resiliency implementation strategy or action plan as a component to the required municipal land use element, as well as integration into other master plan components. Municipalities can also meet and exceed the new climate resilience requirements of the MLUL by pursuing or renewing petitions for plan endorsement by the State Planning Commission. That's where people like me and OPA come in. Plan endorsement is a voluntary review process with specific requirements to ensure consistency in achieving the goals and policies of the state plan. The plan endorsement process expands upon the minimum requirements of the MLUL by incorporating additional planning priorities of increased state emphasis, including enhanced measures to address climate resilience, greenhouse gas emissions reduction, smart growth, sustainability, environmental justice, and social equity into local planning. The new requirements of the MLUL lack a certain level of detail and specificity, particularly with respect to providing strategies and design standards for implementing resiliency measures. Our guide seeks to fill those gaps and reflect what DEP's minimum expectations are for compliance as outlined in its toolkit. I should note that the National Flood Insurance Program's Community Rating System, or CRS, grants credits for some of the activities that are now required under both the recent update to the MLUL as well as that required for plan endorsement. All right, so let's dive in here. I'm just going to go quickly section by section. It's 7 pages. Complying with the MLUL requirements. This section touches on the impetus and background for the law and emphasizes using DEP's toolkit for ensuring MLUL requirements. For example, it reiterates that the required vulnerability assessments must rely on the most recent hazard projections and best available science provided by NJDEP. All right, so what the law specifically requires. For this section, we thought it important to state what the amendments to the MLUL specifically requires is written, which is something that should make your municipal land use attorney happy. All right, local planning for climate change toolkit. I'm not going to delve too deeply into that. Nick is going to do a deeper dive, but again, our document is really intended to work and support and direct folks to DEP's toolkit. It's really should be viewed as a cheat sheet. All right, so let's get into the meat of it, conducting a vulnerability assessment. Steps to determine vulnerability. This is one of the 2 key components of the new requirements, and this section is organized to provide an easy to follow introduction to the various steps involved with conducting a vulnerability assessment. It involves various links to worksheets and other more in-depth guidance materials primarily provided by DEP, but also by other entities such as FEMA, NOAA, Rutgers, etc. And those whose materials work within the framework of using DEP's toolkit.
Hi, Matt. Can I just jump in here for a sec?
Yes.
In the chat document, people want to follow along with you. can you please drop in the URL of the document you're looking at? I know it's on the website
Okay.
for
Want
Resilient
me
Migration.
to do that after I get through this? Or they can't see this?
No, I think they're able to see. They just want to follow along with you on the website as well. So if you have a link, we can, oh, here's the URL. Thanks, Claire. I
Got it?
appreciate it.
Okay.
Yep, we got it. So thank you. Sorry about that.
I can barely hold on to the Zoom technology.
You're doing great. Thanks.
All right, so this process involves assessing and prioritizing a municipality's vulnerable areas, critical facilities, assets, infrastructure, and to map current vulnerability and risk to climate-related hazards, including extreme weather, temperature, fire, flooding, and various sea level rise scenarios with considerations for forecasted future conditions. Again, some of these steps and activities are eligible for points under the CRS program, such as using the Getting to Resilience tool and for state plan endorsement, as well as for certification under the Sustainable Jersey program. All right, so I just kind of highlighted a couple aspects that I think we should just hit home on. There's 7 steps. So step 1 in determining vulnerability, initiate, engage. You're going to use the link to build the team. Again, these are all links to worksheets at the DEP Toolkit. So build the team, planning the team to establish leadership, build diverse membership, identify key stakeholders, establish your advisory committee or committees. A strong and robust team community engagement with stakeholders and the public, including socially vulnerable populations, are critical to a successful strategy. And again, here are some of the links that you can use as tools to sort of help, make sure that your team is going to be representative of the entire community, and make sure you're representing folks who may not traditionally be at the table, but because of their risk to stressors and vulnerability, absolutely need to be included in this process. Step 2, gather plans and data. So you're not just relying on, the best available science by DEP. You're going to do a deep dive into your county hazard mitigation plans, what you have on your books to address transportation and water, sewer service infrastructure, applicable projects such as stormwater and flood control. Step 3, we're going to conduct a build out and capacity analysis. So based on current zoning and anticipated population growth, Anjek loves this tool. So we actually used a link to their model for creating a build out and capacity analysis. This is a great tool for a variety of reasons, right? You want to make sure that you've appropriately matched your water and sewer capacity for things like public available sewer and water. Also, how many people your community can sustain based on your zoning. Sometimes towns don't like the implications that they find with their build out, and that's why it can be a powerful tool, but also too important for understanding vulnerability. All right, step 4, identify and prioritize assets. Using the link provided here, you're going to look at your buildings, your public buildings, your infrastructure, places that are essential during a crisis, including cultural, historic, environmental resources, services, events, populations that are of intrinsic importance, meaning that they're going to be vulnerable. Define the municipality or region as a desired community, right? So certain assets that are really important, especially if you're a tourism destination. To meet the minimum requirements of the MLUL, municipalities should use FEMA's Communities Lifelines approach. The link is here. So a lot of this stuff isn't just going to be your hard infrastructure, but you're going to look at the social fabric of your community and those things that help keep the lines of communication open during and after a disaster. Some important considerations, of course, is going to be considering impacts to socially vulnerable populations and health impacts. That is, those that are going to be prone to negative health financial and housing impacts from natural disasters. Not everybody can bounce back, maybe because you're dealing with an area that already experiences poverty, minority communities, language barriers, those with limited mobility, finances, health, or I mentioned the language barriers, and also critical components of a comprehensive vulnerability assessment. So you want to look at all of that and the barriers that some of these folks and their communities and neighborhoods face, and you want to make sure that they're represented in this process. If applicable, consideration of impacts to designated environmental justice communities, OBC, similar to the above concerns, but with particular consideration where an overburdened community is subject to disproportionate environmental and public health stressor levels as determined by DEP or through conducting a disproportionate impact analysis. So the state at this link to the site has gone about mapping all of the different census block areas within municipalities in the state that are now designated as an overburdened community. There's different types of them, but generally it's based on levels of percentages of poverty, minority groups, or language barriers that are typically going to be more vulnerable to historic and present environmental harm. Many of these are going to be areas in your in urban communities that have historically experienced a disproportionate amount of impact. Many of these communities lie in low-lying areas, whether at the shore or areas that are prone to flooding. So really warrants particular attention, particularly in this day and age. All right, so let's see. 5, visualize vulnerability. So you're going to want to use powerful online tools like New Jersey Flood Mapper, New Jersey Forest Adapt, maybe more appropriate in some of your inland communities for the latter, provides data to visualize the town's exposure to flooding, increasing heat, and impacts to the landscape. It allows you to compare the geographic extent of flooding to identified assets, areas of future development, right? Redevelopment plans. You want to see if those great redevelopment plans you have may actually be in steep slopes or flood hazard areas, and the location of socially vulnerable populations. So you're going to sort of want to overlay this, looking at the overburdened communities map, and there are a lot of them in New Jersey. The New Jersey Flood Mapper tool is an interactive GES system. So you check off the box, the layer overlays different layers, and that's designed to provide visual representations of FEMA's 100-year floodplain for both inland and coastal flooding and different sea level rise scenarios. And by the way, I think it was recently updated, the New Jersey Adapt Municipal Snapshot tool that provides existing summaries on your community. So a lot of the work and the data gathering, a lot of that's already been done. It's out there and it's a fingertip away, and these are really powerful tools to use. Assess your vulnerability. 6, again, using worksheets provided at NJDEP's Toolkit. You're going to use the assessment matrix to assess and rank the risk of each asset under different climate-related hazard scenarios. Step 7, getting to resilience. This is now where you're sort of putting it all together. You're making sense of it. So now you can sort of build your ordinances, your strategies, and your action plan. With this information gathered from conducting the vulnerability assessment, use the GTR tool to further assess your town's readiness to deal with flooding situations and other climate hazards. The GTR tool allows communities to assess how to be prepared, how prepared they are to deal with flooding, coastal storms, and sea level rise, and not just limited to coastal storms. I think we learned from Ida that the inland storms can be just as devastating. All right, so now we move on to the second major component of meeting the new MLUL requirements with respect to climate resilience. This section addresses the MLU requirements to provide a policy, strategies, and design standards to reduce and avoid climate-related risks. Being that these requirements, at least as they were put forth in the MLUL, aren't very specific to say the least, we presented this section as recommended best practices, right? So there's a whole host of things communities can do. We and DEP can provide a lot of guidance, but it wasn't very spelled out. So here's where the municipality is taking the information obtained from completing the vulnerability assessment and developing the resiliency strategy to address vulnerability and risk. Typically, a lot of that gets integrated into your land use element as an adopted component of the master plan. A comprehensive resiliency strategy provides the basis and guidelines for the implementation of land use planning, strategies, actions, including zoning, design standards, site plan review standards, and ordinances that together comprehensively address climate hazards. Our list is not an exhaustive one or highly detailed. There wasn't room for that. Our purpose was not to overwhelm officials, but to try to break this process down into more digestible pieces. So we talk about center-based development, which is a real focus for communities going through the plan endorsement process, building in the right places in the right way, avoiding risk and harm. Here's the bulleted list of some of the best practices that we think are important to take a look at. Again, several of these actions are eligible for points under the CRS program and Sustainable Jersey and are required for state plan endorsement. I should also mention that OPA recently partnered with Sustainable Jersey on a process to make it easier for municipalities to achieve certification when pursuing plan endorsement or vice versa, certification through Sustainable Jersey. That should encourage more towns to achieve higher levels of sustainability and benefit more from the efforts of their volunteer committees. Finally, this closes by ending at various resources that are available. We do update this list. The guidelines are on our website, but we will periodically be updating the list. So we've got resources, we've got lots of good case studies, geographic considerations, right? So not just for coastal areas, but non-tidal or communities in non-coastal inland areas that I think are important to take a look at. You know, risk regarding vulnerability to wildfires. And I should just say that we had a lot of help in putting these guidelines together. Actually, ANJAC provided a lot of valuable feedback, as did NJDEP, and we're very thankful for that. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it back to Deanie. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Nick, whenever you're ready, you can feel free to share your screen.
All right, can everybody see the New Jersey homepage there?
Yes.
All right, great. As Deanie mentioned, I'm Nick Angarone, New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer. I'm going to walk you through our toolkit live, so please excuse any kind of going back and forth that requires. But I thought we thought that'd be particularly helpful for you to really see and understand kind of how the toolkit works and how to navigate it and the extensive resources there. I think that, right, so what Matt just presented to you, as he noted, is built off the toolkit, and I think it's really helpful, kind of kind of the next step guidance for what the toolkit is. So let's start. I'm sure every one of you, the New Jersey website is certainly your homepage, right? Your starting page. So to get to the toolkit, the easiest way to do this, you can just type, if I can spell it, just type in Resilient NJ. And what it'll do is it'll bring you to the Resilient NJ homepage. And I'll explain to you in a moment why we recommend doing this. You can also just type in resilient.nj.gov and it'll bring you to the same place. Resilient NJ is the, I guess what I will call kind of the program name for all of our local community assistance planning support work. And so if you go on the page, it'll provide you links to our ongoing planning projects, to the toolkit, some program documents and trainings. I do want to take this opportunity to, while we're here, to show you, in particular, this first training for A Seat at the Table. This is self-guided training intended to provide you guidance for engaging socially vulnerable populations in a meaningful and community-based way from start to finish. Right, and Matt talked a little bit about kind of overburdened communities and EJ, environmental justice communities, in this presentation. For the purpose of resilience planning, we think it's important to go a little bit further beyond that, right, and to look at all of the types of populations and communities that will be impacted by climate impacts that don't necessarily fall into the definition of an overburdened community. And I think the simplest example is maybe our senior friends, neighbors, and family who are going to respond differently to climate impacts than a lot of the rest of us. And so making sure, just as an example, that you're particularly engaging them in the process to ensure that their viewpoints are addressed and that their particular needs are addressed is also important. Handicap populations and communities is, again, another example that don't necessarily fall into that definition of environmental justice communities or overburdened communities. So I will just go back to so I'll just note that this is, I think, a worthwhile training for you to go through, regardless of whether you're going through the toolkit to develop the vulnerability assessment and resilience action plan. I think it's a great tool that we developed in cooperation with Rutgers, and that NOAA is actually using as a model to develop national training. So I'll go back to the website, the Resilient NJ website, and here is the easiest way to get to the toolkit. And if you can see this address, that's why I don't tell you to try and figure out how to get directly there. So we released the local planning for climate change toolkit back in 2020. The toolkit, I think, is really just that, right? It is a toolkit. What it does is it provides kind of an ideal process, which is indicated with these 4 steps across the top. Some level of guidance, but really a lot of the resources that we thought you would need to kind of go through the process. Right, we recognize that there are not enough resources in place to allow us, the state or the federal agencies, to provide funding and direct support to all 564 now communities, municipalities in the state. And we recognize that many of our communities don't have the capacity or technical experience to undertake detailed planning analyses. We also tried to develop this toolkit from the perspective of what I like to call informed volunteers, right? And so your environmental commissions is exactly what we had in mind, right? So not necessarily your professional planners or your engineers, not necessarily somebody who's not engaged with this at all, but people, professional volunteers, informed volunteers, much like yourselves. We tried to kind of put the level of detail as something that we thought would be appropriate for you to essentially undertake this as if there is not funding from or technical assistance from the state. All right, so how to use the toolkit. You can see the 5 main tabs across the top. when you click on each tab, it will, one, bring up this menu that you can also find under the drop-down menu arrow there. But each time you click on one of these tabs, it will bring you to a landing page for this 4-step resilience planning process. And on each page, it gives you a quick summary of kind of what the overview of that step is. So I'm going to go back to the overview, and again, look at all of the kind of the sub pages that are associated with that step, and we're going to go through most of these. Right. So when you click on any one of them, again, just very quickly, on most of these pages, once you get to these sub pages, there's going to be multiple kind of pages or sections on these pages that provide additional information. All right, so we've kind of identified 3 levels at this point for you to look at when you're coming to these pages. So using the guide, this is generally speaking just an introduction to what it is and how to use the guide and who should use the guide. Kind of just touches on very, very briefly what I just mentioned myself. Climate change in New Jersey. This is intended to provide you the background of the science on the impacts that all of us are going to see and experience from climate change. And this should serve as the basis for what your work looks like going forward. And so again, here we touch on temperature, precipitation, sea level rise, drought and water supply. I will note that it also links back to the scientific report on climate change, which we released in 2020, which will go into much more detail on any one of those topics. You'll also see at the bottom of a lot of these pages where there are worksheets, templates, and other resources that you can click on, and it will bring you to those places as well. Quick page on planning requirements. And right, so here's a summary of the municipal land use law update that Matt referenced. Again, some description of plan endorsement, which Matt also talked about, as well as hazard mitigation planning, which your community is likely involved in working with the county and the Office of Emergency Management. There are linkages between all 3 of those planning processes. And it's important to both understand and leverage those processes to really get a comprehensive analysis and action plan to address your issues. Again, as I mentioned, kind of going through the process and developing the vulnerability assessment and coming up with actions in an equitable manner is extremely important. And so we developed an individual equitable community resilience adaptation toolkit. And what that is it contains a series of worksheets to help you create a community-driven planning process that's inclusive of socially vulnerable populations. It also includes checklists and guiding questions to help you integrate equity into every step of your planning process. We have the Resilience Library. So as I mentioned, this is a resource-heavy document or tool. And every one of the links and resources that you will find throughout the toolkit are all linked to on this page. They are sorted by the steps in that process, those 4 tabs, those 5 tabs across the top. So at any time, you can come back to the library and find the specific link or document that you are using. If it helps you at all, there's a site map that goes through for every one of these 5 tabs, all the subpages. Again, if it's easier for you to navigate that way. All right, So let's go through what is essentially what we believe to be a good planning process. Right. So initiate and engage. Right. Once you feel comfortable and knowledgeable about the impacts of climate change in New Jersey and your community, and the planning requirements in the state, you would move into this stage. And so the first step here is building your team. Right. And again, so this looks at project leadership, making sure you have representation from kind of your technical experts all the way through the public, how to design, coordinate your planning team, roles and responsibilities, kind of are there champions that would be extremely useful to be part of your planning team? Who are the stakeholders that need to be involved in this process, right? And it's everything from kind of, your elected officials to environmental organizations, businesses, community groups, residents, residential groups and associations. Anyone, the idea here is for us to really get a broad and robust group of people to engage in the process. And then finally, advisory committees, if it's appropriate for your community. There's different types of communities or advisory committees you might be interested in, and provide you some level of background on what they might do. In this case, we've provided an invitation template to help you reach out to individuals to participate in those committees. Second piece here is developing your engagement plan, right? So we just talked about the need for that robust engagement. And so this tab section will help you do that. So this is a short description of the engagement plan. This provides some ideas for what might be as part of your a communication plan. And it does, again, we do focus on ensuring that we have inclusive and equitable engagement. And again, there's links to the secret table training, which I referenced earlier, and the equitable planning toolkit. I'll go back here to the engagement plan real quick, and there are other examples of kind of some innovative outreach and engagement tools, meetings in a box. So that's kind of like your communities, for example, is unable to hold a meeting on the process, but a community association in town does. This essentially gives them the resources to hold that meeting themselves. There's example survey questions, trying to provide, again, you the resources to really develop the plan that is important to engage your neighbors. All right. Then the next most important piece here, I think, is setting the vision for your community. Without understanding where your community wants to be, what it wants to be in the future, it's going to be really hard to identify kind of what the impacts, what the hurdles are, and how you develop actions to get to that vision. And so we recommend that you go through a visioning process, and there's different ways to do that, different scales at which you can do that. But we think it's really important to go through that process. It's important that that be a community-driven process. You're going to hear me talk about that over and over and over again, right? This is not something that should be developed, certainly not by the state. It's not something that you necessarily want to do just by a few people in your community. For this to really kind of capture all the needs of your municipality, and to make sure that there's going to be support for the things that have to happen here, it's critical that your friends and neighbors are engaged throughout the entire process. And again, there's some resources to do this. There's recognition here and discussion that creating the vision for your community is likely to be challenged by the impacts of climate change. And so recognizing those challenges, which we'll get into in more detail, but being flexible with that vision is going to be critical to its success. All right, so the next step is understanding your vulnerability. So first, what is a vulnerability assessment? This is fairly general basic information for you. This again talks minimum requirements in New Jersey, again references the municipal land use law, references plan endorsement. And then here we start to provide some tools and data for how you do that. And again, climate related hazards, Matt referenced NJ Adapt. If you're a coastal town, Stockton has been developing beach profiles for decades now. There's different ways to assess social and economic vulnerability. This is our EJ mapping tool. There's a US climate resilience toolkit. There's the NJ Adapt snapshots. All of these are ways for you to gather information to inform your vulnerability assessment. And we also want to make sure we're looking at the vulnerability of our ecological systems. And so there's different tools for you to do that. All right. Another early piece here is understanding the work that's already been done, right? And so I assume that your community has a master plan at this point. You very likely have any number of these other plans that are identified here, and understanding kind of what they say, how they inform the work going forward, and if nothing else, making sure you're not duplicating work that's already been done is a very important step. And again, there's a toolkit to assist you there. Build-out analysis, Matt talked about. This is, if I can say so, I think one of the hardest parts of, and maybe most resource-intensive parts of the requirements of municipal land use law. What I will say about build-out, which we think is critically important, is there's multiple ways to do it, right? And I'll oversimplify and say a lot of kind of build-out analyses kind of look at a trend, and they'll just estimate a number of population or a number of housing units, in 20, 50 years. If we're going to be looking at the vulnerability of our future land uses, it really needs to be geographically based. And that's where I think that there's some level of effort that this is going to take, where you might need your professionals engaged in this conversation. We don't yet have, and I'm not overly familiar with the ANJEC tool, so my apologies. But there's, to my knowledge, not like an online simple tool that we've been pointing to for other resources, for example, that easily produces this type of work for you. Another real critical piece here that, again, Matt referenced is identifying and prioritizing your assets, right? And again, in the past, when we've done vulnerability assessments, it is frequently focused on what I will refer to as critical assets, right? Your police station, your fire station, your hospitals, your sewage treatment plants. We really advocate that you go beyond those critical assets and look at different categories, right? From government services and infrastructure, but your economic assets, right? Where's your central business district? Where are your largest employers? Your natural systems, your health systems, right? Doctors' offices, drug treatment centers, nursing homes, social and cultural, right? Where that could be anything from boardwalks, community centers. Where does your parade, your 4th of July parade, take place every year, right? These are all assets to your community that you want to consider in a comprehensive process. And I certainly don't mean to overlook housing as an asset, and understanding the different types of housing is very important to this process. So then you want to assess the impacts to those assets. And what I'm going to point you to is this vulnerability assessment matrix template. And when you click on here, you will need to download. You can see I've done that at least twice already today. And what this is intended to do is allow you to list out what your assets are, the categories that I identified previously, and this one is pre-populated with some examples. But then look at kind of what is the impact to that asset from different impacts of climate change, right? So just using an example here, let's say you have a recreational center. It might not be impacted significantly by temperature, right? So it gets a 1, it's a low impact. But maybe you're in a coastal zone. Maybe it's going to be impacted by sea level rise. Maybe it's going to be significantly impacted. So you enter in a 5 here. Precipitation, it probably has some level of vulnerability from increased precipitation events. Just about everything does now. So you can kind of evaluate in a relatively simple process what kind of the impact would be. Ocean acidification is another example, and maybe there's no real impact, right? So you can change it, and it'll modify kind of the color and the number to help you see that. But what it is also going to do is over here is it's going to calculate that for you to give you kind of a way to evaluate the kind of the scale of the vulnerability. 2 other columns here, which actually require a little bit of thought and understanding of what those assets are, right? Is description of the impacts and adaptive capacity. Description of the impacts is not, for example, whether that community center is going to get wet. It is what is the impact to your community when it does, right? So if that's the location where all of your after school programs are, what is the impact to your community of not being able to hold those after school programs there? If that's if the community center is the location of, say, your emergency cooling center, what is the impact to your community when the community center is flooded out? That's what we're really trying to identify here. Adaptive capacity, by definition, is the ability of that asset to adjust to that potential damage and to kind of cope with those consequences. So let's say, again, using the community center, it's impacted by sea level rise and flooding. Is there a way for you to still provide the services to that community center was providing? Is there another location for those after school programs? Can they be done virtually? It might be something as simple as there's a back door that's not inundated, and we have to take special measure to allow folks to come in and out of that back door. These are all important things to understand to help guide what the actions that you're going to utilize or that you're going to take to respond. So back to the toolkit itself. Again, this is not something that should be done without stakeholder public input. They're very likely going to have a different understanding. They're certainly going to be able to provide value to understanding what the impacts to your assets are. We do provide some guidance on kind of advanced assessments if you want to look at different things in more detail, right? It does provide information on increased precipitation, high intensity storm events, sea level rise. There is specific guidance that we developed and released on how to incorporate sea level rise projections, which we have very good data about in New Jersey. Similarly, in temperature and some resources to do that, as well as kind of how to assess the vulnerability of your community to public health impacts. So once you know your vulnerability, then kind of the question is, well, what are we going to do about it? And so here we want to start developing that strategy, that action plan. And so again, understanding what happens first if you don't do anything is also important. And again, this can be done at different levels of detail. Particularly when we start talking about level of effort and costs, at a minimum, having this understanding helps inform that conversation, right? We like to think about kind of these actions as investments. Like there's a common statistic out there that for every dollar invested in mitigation projects, there's a $6 in savings right further at the back end. And so understanding kind of what the impacts to your community are if you don't take this action is also very important. So then there's developing the resilience and adaptation strategy itself. Again, there are some tools to assist you do this. Information that we want you to again keep in mind, kind of co-benefits of some of these actions, cost efficiencies, or enhancements to our vulnerability and natural resources. Be innovative. We've provided some examples here of innovative projects around the state, and some links to previous plans and projects that can provide you additional examples. And then we get into kind of an introduction to what the resilience and action plans are. And I'm going to show you two things here. So there is a local resilience actions matrix, which again, you will download. And what this matrix is, I think it's loading. All right.
Nick, it's Dee Dee. Sorry to interrupt here. It's about 12:54 or so. I know you have a hard stop coming up soon. We have a bunch of questions, so I just wanted to ask you to please wrap it up in a minute or so we can get to those questions.
Yeah, this one is important. This link should bring you to a comprehensive Excel spreadsheet of I think there's over 100 or 300 different examples of actions that you can take. However, you can also go into these links and that are going to be categorized by type of actions, and it'll tell you the type of action that's appropriate, or whether the type of action is appropriate to respond to the type of climate change effect and the impacts that it addresses. It also provides you the source document for that action. I won't go into detail because of the time, but there are, it does touch on different types of actions in more detail, right? Building infrastructure, green infrastructure, for example. The next really critical piece here is to evaluate the impact of those actions, right? How does it address both your vision and your vulnerability that you've gone through? And finally, what I will admit is probably not the best, inappropriately named, tracking your progress. I tried to identify a number of federal and state programs where there is funding available, right? And again, this was done about 6 months ago. We tried to identify those programs that we knew would continue into the future. So we don't have some of the more recent announcements, for example. And we also tried to identify ways that you could use kind of local tools to also invest in resilience, and then recommendations for monitoring the next steps. And so I will stop there so we have a couple minutes to go to questions.
That was great. Thank you so much. So the chat box, Nick, is blowing up a little bit. A lot of anxiety about, oh my goodness, how long is this going to take? And that's that, because there is a lot involved in this process. So I'm hoping that you can alleviate some concerns. I think I love what you said in the opening, that you folks, it takes informed volunteers and creating a team, because you don't have to do this by yourself, but creating a team to help put this together.
Do you want to go through the questions?
Yes. So that's actually what a concern that's been dropping up quite a bit about how long this process would take. Let me see. So let's see. Sorry. A question that was asked by John is, does this apply to any zoning plan changes, even at a micro level?
So zoning changes should be something that you look at as a potential way to address kind of your vision and vulnerability, right? If you have high density development planned for the most vulnerable part of your community, you might want to evaluate whether you need zoning changes.
Okay. Thomas asks, are the 2020 census updates incorporated into the demographics of the GIS referenced in the toolkit?
I'm not sure which GIS tool, but it would, but I wouldn't try and answer on whether every single one of them is current at this point.
Okay. Kathleen asked about the Highland communities. If they have a build-out analysis and if they're conforming, is there a tool that's offered that could be shared? I think, Matt, you jumped in and said that's something you can help out with.
They do a pretty complex build-out analysis, but a lot of it has to do with their comprehensive regional master plan, as there's various sort of zoning requirements, based on your level of sensitivity, steep slopes, the resources on the ground, and those regulatory zoning regimes, depending on whether you're in the preservation or in the planning area. And so how that becomes potentially applicable, some of it may be yes, other parts, no, because it's a very specific program. But in terms of how they apply that model of determining a build out and whether there's a wider applicability for export elsewhere, it's a good question. I'll follow up on it. But some of it I don't think would be very applicable, because it's meant to meet the compliance with, a very specific regulatory program.
I'll also note that the Highlands Council had issued a request for proposals to develop Highlands region specific guidance for this purpose. I don't think it's actually been awarded yet, but they will be developing more specific guidance to support the Highlands conforming communities.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Jamie asked if you could explain the relationship, the timing, what feeds into what, which will help with the Sustainable New Jersey certification. What you've described are big initiatives, and just trying to figure out the connections between these two toolkits.
So there's a number of resilience-related actions that Sustainable Jersey has now that I think are fairly simply could be identified as kind of where they link in here. What I will say is that we've started working with Sustainable Jersey to update some of those resilience-related tools, and we'll be looking to making those links. One of the other things I didn't get to mention is over the next year, we'll start working with our state partners and our NGO and academic partners to kind of build on the toolkit to develop more comprehensive guidance for communities to do this, right? And so for Sustainable Jersey, that might result in further updates to different actions, but it also might result in some new actions. We're also hopeful that we'll be able to develop examples and templates for communities. Again, because of time, couldn't mention, we've recently funded the development of 5 climate change related hazard vulnerability assessments as required by the MLUL. And so we hope later this year to have 5 good examples that that apply to different types of communities and geographies that the towns can look at.
That's going to be really helpful to actually see this in person. So from other towns. So funding, will there be updated funding available? Sounds like there's funding through Sustainable Jersey that can continue to help with these initiatives.
I mean, Sustainable Jersey certainly has actions that will guide you through some of this work in more detail. I don't want to speak to they do have different funding streams, but I don't know them all. DEP has a little bit of funding for this type of planning. You know, like I said, we were just able to fund 5 of them. We obviously don't have enough resources to support every community.
Sure. Just a question, the New Jersey Climate Change Resource Center, they have climate change corps, a group of graduate students. Are they available for folks to reach out to and get some assistance that way?
I mean, that's run through Rutgers. And so while, both Matt and my office kind of work in coordination with them, I think it's most appropriate for you to reach out to them directly. There is a website that you should be able to find fairly easily, I believe. But yeah, they provide graduate students to come and do some of this level of work for you.
And that's the New Jersey Climate Change Resource Center as well. Let's see. Okay, there's some specific questions. I dropped your email addresses into the chat box so that folks can connect with you after the fact and ask more questions. I see we are after 1. Do you have any closing comments before we wrap it up?
I'll just note that, as I mentioned, over the next year, we're going to be further developing this guidance. The actual statute that amend the municipal land use law specifically points to DEP in 2 ways. One, that the vulnerability assessment has to use the most current data available. And so we're happy to provide that if it's not something you can easily find. We're also been directed by the legislature to provide technical assistance where feasible. And so we're working to build our capacity to provide that technical assistance to you. This toolkit and that guidance that I'm talking about is one of the ways that we're trying to do that, but we do hope to have additional resources in the relative near future. But at any point, you should reach out to me, or I think there was a climate resilience at DEP email, and we'll certainly see what we're able to do to assist these efforts.
And Nick, one more time, just clarification on time limit for doing all of this. If you can just talk about that, that seems to be a big question here. What is the time frame?
How long it takes to do, you mean?
That, and what's the actual requirement for municipalities to get this done as far as from a timing perspective?
The requirement in the municipal land use law is that when your community updates its master plan, particularly the land use plan element of your master plan, that community or that climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment has to be included in it. If I don't, right now, I'm not going to provide you legal advice, but not most towns aren't doing full municipal master plan updates. So what's unclear to me is if you simply do a re-examination, whether this then applies. I think there's varying opinions on that, but you should look to your planning board attorney for that question.
That's good advice, Nick. Thanks. Matt, any closing comments?
Yeah, and sure, just to jump in with Nick's last comment, I think that's important, is that we certainly don't want to see, if we hope to get anywhere in this process, and the urgency of the climate crisis is very real. The role that our citizen volunteer members of environmental commissions and green teams, as cheerleaders for this kind of stuff, and as advocates, it really is critically important that we not wait till year 10 when we decide it's time. to update the land use element. If you're going to do a master plan re-exam, now is the time to engage. In fact, a lot of this work, particularly with respect to doing the climate resilience, the assessment, right? This is kind of a two-part. Like you assess, make sense of what's going on and your vulnerability, and then you do the plan to prioritize what you're going to do about it, like Nick said. So that first part, there's no reason why towns shouldn't start doing that work now, whether through their green team or their environmental commission. Certainly some aspects and pieces of this are going to be appropriate for, maybe bringing in your consultant if you don't have a planning department in your office. But there's lots of stuff that, our citizen committees can and should be doing now. So that's an important role for all of us as advocates. Certainly, we tend to work through the OPA to work with towns that are going through plan endorsement. And a big piece of that is in terms of bringing your planning into compliance with the state plan. That's going to entail a lot of requirements to update various elements of your master plan, your circulation element, your land use plan. A lot of these things, when towns come to us, are already woefully outdated. And so one thing that we work together is we may find the town to be substantially consistent with the state plan, but that'll be conditioned the approval of the state planning commission upon the town and the SPC agreeing to a plan implementation agreement that gets